I'm Matthew Barron. A few of my fellow authors in the Gifts of the Magi anthology are doing little teaser readings of the stories they have in the anthology. Gifts of the Magi is a holiday collection, but it's not your traditional holiday stories. This is speculative fiction, where anything is possible. One of the best things about this anthology, besides me being in it, of course, is that the money raised through this book goes to the Indie Reads Adult Literacy Charity. So by buying this and enjoying these stories, you are also helping other people learn to read. It's hard to believe my story that I wrote in this, I wrote in July, I think it was, because it's a story about the height of winter. It's called The Longest Night. And it kind of jumps from my book Valora, which is a sword, sorcery, pulp fiction kind of thing. It takes place in the same world. It has one of the characters in it, but it's its own baby. It's its completely own thing. It kind of answers one of the mysteries. At the end of Valora, there's a character that kind of disappears, and we get a hint of what may be happening with that character after that book is over. But this is a completely self-contained story. The Longest Night. Tears filled Mother's eyes when she pulled the fur hat down over my ears. I was tall for my age, and she had to look up at me. Normally, there would be nothing to do but sit by the fire eating stored food, but the supply of firewood was dwindling fast. We hadn't seen a winter like that in my lifetime. I was only 12, granted, but 12 years is a long time. It wasn't the cold that scared Mother so. I said goodbye to little Elsa, who lay on her cot facing a wall of mismatched stones and pine timbers. When she turned to me, terror filled her big brown eyes, and she shrieked like a banshee. Mother pushed me aside and grabbed the child in her arms. "Oscar!" she scolded. "What were you thinking?" In all those layers, I must have looked like a bear. I never thought what kind of an effect that could have. Only 5 nights earlier, a monster had burrowed right through that thatched roof of Elsa's cottage and killed her family. Elsa was too young to understand. She still begged to see her parents before she went to bed at night. We were Elsa's family now. Every night that week, a villager had been killed. These attacks were like nothing I had seen. I know, I was only 12 and hadn't seen much, but this beast didn't just attack people out in the woods. It burrowed into people's homes and sliced families apart. I was sweating under my layers and glad when Father called me. I was tall, but my father towered over me. He really did look like a bear in all those furs. Someday, I will be as tall and broad-shouldered as him. We slung axes over our shoulders and headed outside. Father scowled at the evergreen wreath hanging on our door and tossed it to the ground. "Mother hung that up after Elsa came," I said. "She says it keeps the night monster out." Father harumphed. "I have more faith in the slate tiles on our roof. No monster is getting in here." I hoped Father was right. I didn't see the harm in a little extra precaution. The eastern mountains cast long shadows over our valley. Father and I joined Red-Faced Bilby and his son, Joseph, in the village square. We called it a square, but it was just a flat, grassless area between the trading post and the chief's house. Joseph lowered his scarf, stuck out his tongue, and crossed his eyes. He was my age, but much shorter, of course. I would have returned the gesture, but Father scowled. Father didn't like to joke around. Bilby seemed much more fun. Loomis and his sun prophets gathered around a metal sculpture called a sundial. It was supposed to tell time using shadows, but the mountain cast a larger shadow than it ever could. Loomis shouted to all who would listen, and those who didn't want to listen were forced to hear him as well. "The days grow shorter. Night is winning." His words came out in long clouds of condensed moisture. The tall, slender prophet wore orange robes and a yellow sash over his furs. A thick yellow cap graced his balding head. Even the sun's emissaries weren't immune to the cold. Loomis and his 2 assistants had accompanied the king's men into the village last fall. We only heard from the king at harvest time, when he collected a percentage of our produce. That was the only time anyone came from the lowlands. Father said it was easier to give them what they wanted, so they would leave. The king's men left, but the prophets stayed. "Tonight is the line," Loomis continued. "If the days grow any shorter, darkness will win. Night will consume all our days forever, but you can turn the tide against the forces of death." One of the prophets, a short, pudgy man, slipped a necklace around my neck. A golden disc dangled from the cord. "You must wear a sun disc if you are going into the woods. Only 3 histerns." Father pushed the pudgy prophet away and threw the disc back at him. "Keep your trinket and keep your hands off my son." Loomis interceded. "The sun disc will ward off the monster." Father's voice was flat. "For only 3 histerns. What a bargain." "Indeed," Loomis said. "A small price for the sun's protection." "The mountain provides all we need," Father said. "Look around," Loomis shouted for all to hear. "This mountain is dead. Only through the sun can there be resurrection." Father turned and walked away. Loomis shouted, "It is one thing to reject the sun's blessing for yourself, but think of your child!" Father's mouth narrowed into a firm line. I thought he was going to turn around and punch Loomis. Joseph acted instead. He lifted a stone from the ground and slung it into Loomis's face. Loomis's 2 allies doted after his bleeding head, but the prophet pushed them away. "Night is eating day," Loomis shouted. "Make your offerings to the sun. Put a wreath on your door to show you are his." Loomis's ravings faded as we made our way from the village. In less than an hour, the western mountains would cast their shadow over the valley. "What if Loomis is right?" I asked. Father took a deep breath. "The sun doesn't care if we have a wreath on our door." "But the nights are getting longer." "The nights always get longer this time of year." I didn't remember anything getting longer or shorter. I remembered it getting cold, but never this cold. This year was different. The trees in the outskirts of the pine forest were saplings. We went deep into the woods, where the firs were large and thick. We started chopping. My breath crystallized on my scarf, and my nose ran uncontrollably. I couldn't stop to wipe it without breaking rhythm. 2 of us drove our blades forward as the others pulled away. The rhythm made the work easier. At last, one of the trunks creaked, and we stopped to watch it fall. The shadows were deep, the sun hidden. Bilby called to us before we could begin again. A man lay in the snow. The fur cloak over his blue tunic offered meager protection from a mountain winter. Father examined the stranger's fingers. "He looks like a southerner." He raised his voice and addressed the stranger. "What are you doing out here in this... What are you doing up here this time of year? Are there others?" The stranger spoke an unfamiliar language, but we understood a few common words. "All dead." "Idiots," Father said, "coming up here this time of year. We have to get him indoors." Young Joseph argued, "If we leave now, we'll have to start all over tomorrow." "We have no choice," Father said. "He may lose those fingers as it is." We loaded the stranger onto the sled, intended to carry firewood for the village. The sun sank lower as we made our way back. Something flapped in the trees above. It was the first animal sound I had heard all day. I looked up, but saw nothing through the thick pine needles. Something landed in the tree to the left of us. I caught a glimpse of movement. The branches moved aside. 2 eyes glowed like the setting sun. "Father!" I called. "The monster!" A thin body dropped from above. Leathery wings slowed its descent, and the monster's boots landed silently in the snow. The skeletal creature wore clothing like a man. No chilled breath emerged from the monster's mouth. It was death, coming to claim us for night, just as the prophets had warned. I ran. I ran until the shouts disappeared. I didn't look back, but imagined the gray face grinning like a skull behind me. I tripped over a tree root and rolled down the slope. Snow dug into my sleeves and boots. I finally came to a stop, half buried. My breathing finally slowed and the world stopped spinning. I awaited the sounds of pursuit, but none came. I don't know how long I remained. I could no longer ignore the cold moving through my body. If I didn't move, this pile of snow would be my grave until the spring thaw. I remembered Loomis's words. If night won its battle with the sun, there would be no spring thaw. Well, and that's where I'm going to end. I, of course, already know what happens because I wrote it. But for you to find out what happens, you're going to have to pick up a copy of Gifts of the Magi, available on Kindle and in print, and the proceeds go to benefit the Indie Reads Adult Literacy Charity. So I hope you'll pick it up and enjoy my story, and there's also 13 other great stories by other speculative fiction authors. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to me, and goodbye.